All right. I always feel very proud of myself when I remember to press record. I usually forget. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. I got to share a little bit about myself, but I'd love to know just a little bit more about who is in the room today. So if you wouldn't mind just putting your name and maybe your position and the site that you work at so that we can sort of get a feel for who's here with us today. And welcome if you're just joining us. Thank you so much for your patience this morning. I had to start a little bit late. I'm going to drop a link in the chat that goes to the slides. You don't need those open as we go along, but there are some resources if you want to access them later. My name is Stephanie, and we're recording the session in case people want to go back and look at it again later. But you're invited to put either in the chat or if you feel comfortable unmuting your name, what your position is and where you work. Awesome. So thanks. We've got Sherry with us, who's a senior aide at SoCal High. No problem, Allie, don't worry. All right, Donna's with us, and IA for Chrysalis too. Nice, Donna. Okay, Allie, teacher of the visually impaired. Andrew, teacher at SoCal High. Nice to have you, Andrew. Angelina, an autism aide for C3. Paul, instructional aide, Del Mar Elementary. Awesome, Paul. My daughter goes to Del Mar. She'll be in second grade next year, still in disbelief, hence the long pause. And Amy at Chrysalis. All right, great. So today we're going to cover some tips and tricks, some hacks for using Google that is non-grade specific. I see that we have a range of sort of student ages that we work with in the group, and that's okay. All of the things that we'll be sharing can be modified to work for younger or older students. And just a quick note to let you know that this session is for you. So if at any point you have a question or you want me to pause and explain something again, please please feel free to put it in the chat or to unmute your mic if a question or a comment comes up. The session is for you, and I want to make sure that you get your questions answered. So just now that we know sort of the ages that we work with, the sites that we're from, I'm just curious in the chat if you could put a 1, 2, 3, or 4 with your familiarity with using G Suite, and particular using like the Google tools with students. So are you a 1, a newbie, or all the way up to a 4, like a wizard? You have a lot of tricks in your bag, but maybe you're here to learn some more. All right, nice. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So we have some 1s, some 2s, some 3s, and also like a caveat, like maybe comfortable using it for ourselves, but haven't tried using it with students yet. So we're going to go over a lot of tricks that will help you using Google with students. And the goal is to really find ways to use the G Suite to empower your students and to give them voice and choice in your classroom. So just before we get started with Google, just a quick sort of touching base on why it's important to differentiate and to provide options for students in the classroom. I really like this visual of the jaggedness principle. Thumb up if you've heard of the jaggedness principle before. No? Okay. Well, basically it's from a book called The End of Average by Todd Rose. And in it, he describes the idea that there's no human that sort of fits that average down the middle, right? We each have things that are maybe strengths for us and areas of growth. And so we really want to make sure that when we're designing our instruction and when we're providing learning opportunities for students, we provide multiple entry points so that people are able to bring their strengths to the table and they're also feeling supported in areas where they could use support. And so one way that you can do that is by the premise of universal design. And I really like this visual. This is universal design in a public space. So this is a way that they incorporated a wheelchair ramp into stairs in a way that really benefits everybody, right? We have the stairs, we have the ramp, and it all is also visually appealing. So it's helpful to sort of think of ways that we can design our instruction to be accessible to everyone. And universal design for learning is a way to do that. This visual of a buffet sort of describes universal design for learning. As a teacher or an instructor, we're setting out a variety of options for our students, a variety of ways for them, just like a buffet, to access a meal, right? But also a variety of ways then for them to showcase their learning. So it's all about providing those multiple entry points for students to access things, but also multiple ways for them to show their understanding. So it moves the teacher from the role of sort of that sage on the stage to a facilitator, a way that we sort of collect all our lesson materials into one place and make them available for students to access. If you want to read more about UDL, then I've provided a link here on the slides. I found that most of the SpEd teachers that I've connected with are the most well-versed on UDL. So if you would like to read more about it, it's really interesting. I provided a link here for you. Okay, so the 4 things we're going to focus on in terms of Google today are Google Classroom, Hyperdocs and choice boards, some tricks and tips for Google Sheets, which is probably more for your backend stuff in terms of the teacher side, and some extensions that I think are pretty cool on Chrome that can really help to increase the accessibility to things that you're providing to your students in terms of digital content. Before I dive too deep into Google Classroom, can you put a yes or a no in the chat if you use Google Classroom with your students? Okay. Allie's a yes. Amy, yes. No, Angie. Okay. Andrew, yes. Okay. Teacher uses it, Paul. Great. Okay. I'm happy to see yeses and also excited to see a no. I'm going to share some tips for using Google Classroom that I think make it a little bit more student friendly, not only for SpEd students, but for all students in general. So I'm going to go over 5 quick tips for using Google Classroom to make it a little bit more accessible. I'm going to skip the video on Google Classroom since most of us use it. And I'm just going to explain that Google Classroom is a free tool available in the G Suite that allows you to organize your classroom materials online. Your students sign up and join your class, and you can post assignments. And here are the 5 tips for making Google Classroom more accessible. So one of the things that I found that's really helpful for my students in terms of supporting their executive functioning is that you can actually assign a due date in Google Classroom. So the way that you would do that is that when you're in an assignment, right before you click assign, you can click due date and time and select a date. And then what happens is that due date sign shows up for your students in multiple places. If you're working with your students on using Google Calendar, the due dates will show up in Google Calendar, which is really helpful in terms of helping to keep them organized. And then additionally, when they're in Google Classroom, on the left, their assignments will show up in the order that they're due. So sometimes when students are looking at a list of assignments in Google Classroom, it can be overwhelming to determine like where to start, what to do next. And so attaching due dates and times to your assignments really helps your students to stay organized. So I'm going to hop over into Google Classroom and just show you sort of what that looks like. So I'm in Classroom, in a fake Google Classroom, and I'm going to go ahead and press create and create an assignment. So you want to give your assignment a title, Another thing that I find is helpful that I found a couple of other teachers use as well is adding a sort of an emoji key into your titles of your assignments. So my computer has something where I can type the name of an emoji and it'll pop up and I can click it on my keyboard. But if you don't have that, you can get an extension called Emoji Keyboard and you can search emojis really quickly and insert them. Even just that little visual icon sort of helps to break up all the text that can happen in the Google Classroom stream. And then some instructions. And I could link an article. So I have one here about sea otters. I'm going to copy the URL and go to the link and add it. And then over on the right-hand side is where I can go ahead and add that due date. So it is defaults to no due date. You can go ahead and click on due date and select a day, and you can even select a time if you find that helpful for your students. So then I'm not going to select a time, but I'm going to go ahead and click assign. And you'll see that in the classwork, it gives the due date over here, but then also in the stream, now it's saying that it's reminding the student that coming up on Monday, there's an assignment that's due. So it's just a little tip or trick that helps your students to stay organized on their assignments in Google Classroom. The next tip that I have for Google Classroom is more for you than it is for your students, which is scheduling assignments. So as a teacher, I found that I typically had a day of the week where I would work on sort of setting up my assignments for the week. Usually it was either Sunday afternoon, unfortunately, or Monday, where I was sort of front loading a lot of assignments for my students, but I didn't want them to see them all right away and get overwhelmed. So you can actually schedule your assignments to be released at a particular day and time. So if you're sort of front loading and adding a bunch of assignments at once, it will just release them when you want them to be released. So you could, in theory, post all your assignments for the week, but they would just be released on the days that you wanted them. This is really helpful to, again, prevent sort of that Google Classroom overwhelm for your students. And it's also helpful for you as a teacher because you can work when it's convenient for you, and then you don't have to remember to sort of publish those assignments at the right time. So I'm going to show you again sort of how that works. I'm back in the classwork tab. I'm going to press create for a new assignment. And then you'll notice that over here next to assign, I can click the drop down arrow and that's where I can schedule it. So I could schedule this to go ahead and get posted tomorrow at 8 a.m. But you can customize. You can pick from any day or time to release the assignment. That has been sort of a really big lifesaver for me in terms of working on the back end of Google Classroom. Another thing that I want to point out next to the assign is that you can also save it as a draft. So sometimes when you're working, you have a chance to get started on something, but not totally finished, and you don't want it to go live yet for your students. You can save that as a draft and then go back and finish it later. So it's helpful just to sort of know that those features are available to the right of the assign button. Another really helpful tip and trick in Google Classroom is that you don't have to assign it to all of your students. So I don't think I can demo this one because I don't have any students in my sample class, but this is a picture of what it looks like. So it defaults when you're in an assignment, it will default to all students. But if you click to the right of all students, when you have students enrolled in your class, you can deselect all students and just select the few students that you want. So that's really good when, say, you're putting out a piece of reading like an article and you have a few students that can access a higher level reading article and a few that can access a lower level reading article. You can assign just the particular students that you want to that assignment, and then nobody else will see that they received that assignment. All right. Another helpful trick is sometimes I know that I was using a lot of things from Teachers Pay Teachers that were sort of interactive Google Slides or worksheets that I wanted my students to work on Google Classroom. And I want to make sure that each of them have their own copy. And that is something that you can go ahead and do in Google Classroom as well. That way, when students are working on something, it will automatically make a copy for the student that's saved in your drive with their name. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but when you start a Google Classroom, it starts a folder in your drive where all of the work for that Google Classroom is stored. And so it makes it nice and accessible for you because you don't have to track down those assignments. Your students' assignments all then are shared automatically with your drive. And when you have them make their own copy, then you can search by the student's name and you can see their assignments. So I'm going to change this to practice choice board. And I'm going to go ahead and link to one of the files in my drive. Hopefully it's there because it's recent. All right, so I have this choice board and I'm going to insert it. And this is a way for you when we get to the next piece, which is on Hyperdocs and choice boards, a way for you to make one copy of something and then have Google Classroom make a copy for each student for you. That way they can actually add their responses into their own sheets and you can view them. So right now, the default setting for slides is that they can view it. So they would be able to look at the choice board, but they wouldn't be able to make any changes. If you wanted them to each have their own choice board, maybe you have questions in there that you wanted them to answer, there were activities and you wanted to see their work, then you can click this arrow right here and make a copy for each student. I tend to avoid that students can edit the file because that usually ends up with a disaster because that means they're all editing the same file. But if you did want to make a collaborative project, like how we talked about, you can assign things to particular groups. You might want to make a group project on Google Slides, and then you would go ahead and click students can edit file. You would just want to go over with them that, you know, you're all working on the same document. So make sure not to delete each other's work. And while I'm here, and this is assigning, I do want to show you, this isn't on my slides, but 2 more tricks that I use for organizing my Google Classroom that I find to be really helpful. Has anyone used topics before? Yeah, awesome. Okay, Sherry. So topics are great because the stream, right now it looks nice and clean because we only have 2 things, but once you start loading assignments, it just becomes this crazy long list. And so Google Classroom has a feature called Topic that you can use to help break it up. So I've seen teachers most commonly either organize topic by sort of content area, so reading, writing, math. I've also seen teachers that organize it sort of by week so that students can see their assignments by week. So this is the week of August 1st, and I'm going to click add. And then what I can do is, since both of these assignments were in this week, I'm just going to quickly drag and drop them. And now it's a little bit more organized so that students can go back and it's chunked. And then you'll notice that once I added a topic, it adds this sort of table of contents off to the left so that as you build your classroom throughout the year, students can quickly click to the topic, the week, or the content area that they're looking for the assignment in. And it's just another organizational feature that makes it really nice. Another thing that I like to do when I'm first setting up a Google Classroom is in the stream, the default setting is that students will get an announcement here every time I create a new assignment. And that makes the stream look super cluttered and messy. I like to keep the stream just for sort of messages or welcomes or communication between the students and myself. And I like to keep the assignments in classwork So one of the first things I always do when I'm setting up a Google Classroom is go to the settings wheel and scroll down to the settings for stream. And I actually hide the notifications for classwork on stream and click save. And what that does is that cleans up my stream so that I can save that as a space that's more like a message board, and it is less confusing for students. So there's just a couple tricks that when you work with Google Classroom, the organizational features can be really helpful to keep things clear for you and your students. Okay, my last Google Classroom tip is another one that's also sort of for you, for the teacher's end, but there's actually a Chrome extension called Share to Google Classroom. And this is a little bit old. So when I looked for this extension, I think it was called Add to Google Classroom, but you see this little button right up here that's a green circle with a yellow plus. What that lets me do is that anytime I'm in something and I say, oh, you know what, I actually want to make this an assignment. So if I'm looking at an article on Chrome, or maybe I'm working on a slideshow and I want to quickly add it to Google Classroom without having to go back to Google Classroom, I can click the extension and it will open up. Can you see my pop-up window that says Share to Classroom? Okay, cool. Wasn't sure if that was showing. So it'll open up a little pop-up window with all of my Google Classrooms that I have. I can click on the one that I want, and I can go ahead and directly from this page, go ahead and create an assignment, ask a question, make an announcement, create a material. All the same things that you see in Google Classroom when you're starting an assignment are here, so that it's just one less step that you have to do. So that extension is a really big time saver. I'm going to pause here to see if there's any questions or clarifications or comments about Google Classroom before we go on to the next piece. Okay. All right. And again, let me just grab for you that Chrome extension and put it in the chat so that you have it in case you want to add it. Okay. So mine, of course, is showing remove from Chrome because I've already added that extension. But if you don't have it yet and you went to the link in the chat, this would say install, and you would follow the directions to get that Chrome extension for easily adding things to your Google Classroom. All right, the next, oh, I just want to let you know that I don't know if you follow Ben Cogswell on Twitter, but he is a kindergarten teacher and also an ed tech coach. And I just love everything that he does. And so I stole his resource for Google Classroom support. So that's in today's slides. It has all of these linked to tutorials on how to do these different things on Google Classroom. So that's in the slides for you in case you have any questions about particular things. All right. Now we're going to switch over to Hyperdocs and just a quick check-in like we checked in about Google Classroom. Can you put a yes or a no in the chat if you have used Hyperdocs before? Ooh, okay. No's all around. I'm super excited. Hyperdocs are one of my very favorite tools in terms of enabling you as a teacher to sort of give your students the instruction that you want them to receive and have them work through it a little bit more independently while you're able to float around the room and support your students and provide coaching. So Hyperdocs are an amazing tool, and they were created by a group of female teachers who are now called the Hyperdoc Girls. And they're very simple to create and super effective. So I'm really excited to share with you what Hyperdocs are and how to use them with your students. I'm going to date myself here a little bit, but the best way that I can think to describe Hyperdocs are like a mixtape. So if you remember sort of getting that cassette tape, yes, Allie, and like waiting for on the radio to record your favorite song, but like you didn't just put the songs in any order, right? You put them in a particular order so that there was a particular flow to your mixtape. And maybe even you received a mixtape as a gift from a friend or a significant other, and that was very powerful for you, or had like there was a meaning to the way that things were organized, and it enabled you to sort of have a mood or a feeling that that person wanted you to have. So that is a Hyperdoc. It's sort of like a mixtape, but for teaching. It takes all of your lesson components and it puts it into one place. So you're able to sort of give your students this complete package of your lesson, everything from the hook to an extension activity to exploration, all for them to take and sort of work through at their own pace while you're able to support them. Hyperdocs were an amazing tool during distance learning because it enabled you to sort of have students work a little bit more independently, but they're also a really great tool to use in the classroom. Another thing that I love about Hyperdocs is that because they're popular and common, there's a lot of them that have already been created for you. So simply searching for something that you would like a Hyperdoc on, more often than not will yield one that's pre-made that you can either take and use the way it is, or you can tweak it to fit the needs of your students. So here's sort of an idea of what a basic Hyperdoc looks like. And I'm going to go over some key features of a Hyperdoc. You'll notice that on the left-hand side is where the teacher has provided and collected some resources, some tasks that they would like their students to do. So here, the teacher is starting out with an explore prompt and giving the students a YouTube video to watch to sort of get hooked on the topic. Then the teacher has linked an Edpuzzle video for practice. So something where the students are able to watch some direct instruction and answer questions about it. And then notice that on the right-hand side, there's a column for students that says your task. So basically the teacher content goes on the left, and then students are inputting responses or completing a task on the right-hand side. Remember when I showed you on Google Classroom how you could make a copy for each student? That's something you would use with a Hyperdoc, right? So you would have your pre-made Hyperdoc, you would post it on Google Classroom if you wanted to, and select make a copy for each student. And then they would be able to be inputting their information on that right-hand side, and you would get that in your drive where you could review their answers and their responses. So I just wanted to show you a homemade example so that you could sort of take a better peek, because I know that it's probably really small looking at this one on my screen. So here's an example of one that I made for my students for distance learning when we were working on a unit on water. And so I want you to just take maybe 1 minute to click on that link and browse through and see sort of what do you notice and what do you wonder about that Hyperdoc. So just take a minute until 9:45 to browse through the Hyperdoc, and then we'll come back. All right, did you get a chance to sort of quickly breeze through? Did anybody notice anything, or did anything stick out to you about sort of the design or things that were included? Yes, pictures all a different size. Easy to follow. Yes. So I like to share things that are less than perfect, Allie. And so this was like one of my first attempts at making a Hyperdoc. And my students did comment that it was too long. And so as I went further along in the process, I shortened my Hyperdocs down. But I just wanted you to be able to see sort of, this was one that I was able to pull together pretty quickly. And then with feedback from my students, my Hyperdoc style and ease of use got better. That was my attempt to sort of take something from a textbook and transfer it over to a Hyperdoc. But you can see how, even though it was long and there's lots of information, it's easy for students to sort of grab something like this and start working through. And then in the classroom space, you as a teacher can walk around and provide support as needed. So it really helps students to be able to work a little bit more independently while it frees up time for you to support them. So a Hyperdoc is a fancy name, but there's not very many things that you have to learn in order to make a Hyperdoc. All it is links to other things and a digital document. So that could be something that's Google Docs or Google Slides. So all that you would need to be able to make a Hyperdoc is familiarity with using Google Docs and or Google Slides. And there's lots of templates available online. Like I said, there's completed lesson plans, but there's also just the template where you can change the text to fit your need. And we've talked a little bit about the benefits of Hyperdocs, but I'm going to touch on that a little bit more. So they're sort of like an instructional roadmap. They take your students from the start of a lesson until the end. And they can be engaging for students. They're really flexible. Students are able to work at their own pace, and they can choose how to access material. So a lot of times in that explore section of a Hyperdoc or in the video section, teachers will provide multiple options for students so that they're able to pick between the content that really interests them. It also enables you as a teacher to sort of flip your instruction if that's something that you're interested in doing. You could assign some pieces of a Hyperdoc for students to complete before so that they're able to come into a lesson engaging in something a little bit more in depth. Like I mentioned, if you search Hyperdocs on Google, there's tons of Hyperdocs that are available by different sections. Even I've had luck with searching particular lessons or topics, and there's a Hyperdoc usually made for it that you can tweak. I would like to just plug that the Hyperdoc girls actually have their own website on Hyperdocs in specific. And so I'm going to put that into the chat. And it has a page called Teachers Give Teachers that has a bunch of digital lesson plans or Hyperdocs that are already collected and sorted sort of by grade level, by content area. So you can browse through these to find a ton of really good pre-made lesson plans. You're also able to sort them and able to search for something in particular that you want. So that is a really, really great resource in terms of Hyperdocs. They also have a section on the website where you can access the templates as well. And you can sign up for it if you want, but you can access all of the material for free without signing in. Okay, before we move on from Hyperdocs to Google Sheets, does anyone have questions about Hyperdocs or maybe an idea for how they might use Hyperdocs with their students? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next section. So we've covered Google Classroom, we've covered Hyperdocs. Now we're going to talk about some tips and tricks for Google Sheets that are actually really great for you if you're organizing student information in Google Sheets. And this is more of a teacher hack than a student hack. This is things that you can do to sort of categorize and set your year up for success in terms of Google Sheets. So one of the very best tricks that I love is that you can actually freeze columns and rows in Google Sheets so that if you have a sheet that's very long, you could freeze that top header so that it doesn't move. So I don't know if you've ever experienced the pain of a very long table on Google Docs where the title of the columns is at the top. You're on page 3 and you're like, I have no idea what each of these mean. In Google Sheets, you're able to freeze that header row so that you can scroll through the content, but the header row stays the same. So in order to do that, I have an example of a Google Sheet, and the first row is already frozen. You can see that there's sort of a thicker gray line right here that indicates that that first row is frozen, so that when I scroll on the Google Sheet, that one stays the same. And there's a couple ways that you can freeze. There's actually a bar that's up at the top left of the sheet that's ready for you to drag to the content that you want to freeze. So notice that I've already dragged this one, so it's down here. When you start a Google Sheet, those 2 bars will be up at the top left. If I want to freeze my first row, I drag it down. Now that first row is frozen. If I wanted to freeze any of the columns, like maybe I want to freeze the timestamp, I drag that over, and now those columns are frozen too. So it's just a little hack that just makes your life a lot easier when you're creating Google Sheets that collect a big amount of data. Has anyone used that freeze strategy before? No? Okay. Yeah, it is really helpful, Amy. It's the little things. Okay, the next one is a huge game changer, which is that you can actually insert checkboxes into Google Sheets. And so I've used this for tracking projects in terms of like where people are on in completion. So let me show you an example of one that I've used. So I'm working with a bunch of teachers who are developing curriculum guides for me, and they needed a book, they needed to complete an orientation, and then they also need to sort of track where they are in terms of completing their lesson plan. And so having these checkboxes has been a game changer. It just really helps me to quickly and easily sort through to see who's completed something. And the way that you add a checkbox is actually very easy. So you click into the cell, go insert, checkbox, and now there's a checkbox there. So think of all the possibilities. Like for me, what comes up is field trip permission slips and money, or, you know, if you're tracking a longer term project and you want to keep track of where your students are in the benchmarks, the checkboxes can be a game changer. All right. I also want to show you that there's a way to create data validation. That is a fancy way to say that you can choose what the responses are that are available for students or for you on a Google Sheet. So again, if we're thinking about like project tracking or a field trip response form, or maybe even keeping track of a student's score, you can actually insert I'm going to insert a column for that data validation. And I'm going to say maybe project status. And then I can go to data and data validation. And I'm going to choose from a list of items. And now I can enter those items. So it's project status. So it might be something like not started, working, draft, and completed. And I'm going to click save. And now you can see that in that row, there's this little arrow I can click on, and I can just quickly go ahead and label for the what their project status is. So maybe this student is still working, the student is completed, the student is still on their draft. And so it's just another way to sort of help keep your data organized in Google Sheets. Okay, another item that can be helpful when you're working on formatting something in Google Sheets is the use of merge cells and also wrapping text. So if you look over here towards the right, you can see that we have some responses that are a little bit longer. So sometimes in Sheets, you might have written text that's longer, and the default for that is overflow, which gives me the shivers, right? Because now I can only see part of what this person has input, and I can't see all of the information unless I click on the cell and see it up at the top. So to change that, you can go to Format, Wrapping, and you can change to Wrap. And now it will automatically resize the rows so that there's enough space for all of the text. So that's helpful if you're using Sheets for something like comments on a report card or anecdotal notes. That allows you a little bit more space in terms of text. Another thing that can be helpful for formatting is, say that you want to have a title on your sheet that goes across more than one row. You can always merge cells. So sometimes I would like to have a title so that if I print the document like Mrs. Sumarna's class list, but I want it to be maybe centered, I can grab all of the rows and go ahead and go to Format, Merge Cells, Merge All, and now all of those are merged, and I can change the setting to go in the middle. And so that helps you if you're trying to make something in Sheets that you want to print out nicely. Merging can really help you in terms of the formatting. And we covered text wrapping. Okay, the last thing I want to cover for Sheets, which is a game changer if you have a lot of information in one sheet. Yes, freeze option is very helpful, is filtering. So one of the things that can be tricky is if you have information and there's a ton of data and you want to see maybe like, here's my registration for an event, and I have teachers that are in all different districts, but maybe I want to see just the teachers that are from Live Oak so that I'm able to get that information. What you can do for that, let me click off of the more. Okay, is you can go to data and create a new filter. So that funnel icon is the filter. Think about filtering data through a funnel. And now what I have at the top of the rows is I have this little triangle where I can set up filters for the different sections. So if I wanted to see just the teachers who registered for my event from Live Oak, I can click this filter button and I can unselect or deselect all the other districts and click OK. And now it's filtered so that I see just the teachers from that particular school district. And if I wanted to undo the filter, notice that right now it's giving me the filter icon instead of the triangle to show that this has been filtered. I just click it and I think I go to clear. Always forget. Oh no, select all and press OK. And now they're unfiltered again. So I find that the filtering option can just be really helpful when you have something that you're looking, maybe you were working on that project tracker and you wanted to see all the students that were still working on a draft, then you could quickly filter and see that if you had a ton of information. Okay. I'm going to pause here to ask if there's any questions about Sheets before we move into some extensions that I find to be very cool. Okay, Allie's good. Yes, Amy.
Hi, good morning.
Hi, Amy.
Just a quick question. We make a sheet, but every time I do it, I have to put the date. Do you have any tricks about how every time I sign up and make changes to the sheet, I don't have to go and date it again. I usually just type in the date. Yeah.
Oh,
That.
okay. Like you want a timestamp?
Yeah, like so I print out a sheet and then sometime I go back and make new changes or the teacher does and they'll be like floating around some old data, old sheet. So I'd like everybody to use that dated sheet instead.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah, I think there's a way to do that, but I'm not sure. Can I look it up and then get
yes,
back to
please.
you?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, okay. I know that I was just looking at a way to do that in Google Docs, but I'm not sure how to do that in Sheets. If you use a form for the data, then you can automatically put a timestamp. So
Okay,
like this data was collected via form, but I'm not sure how to do that if you're just going directly into a sheet, but I can look it up. I'm sure there's a way.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Are there any other questions about Sheets? Okay. The last thing I want to show you is some extensions that make, if you're doing something online, a little bit more accessible for your students and can support them in particular with reading that's online. So like we showed before with the add to Google Classroom, extensions are things that you get from the Google Chrome store and they extend the use of your Google Chrome. So when you're in Google Chrome, they're just sort of little tools that you can add onto your Chrome that live up here once you add them. You can also access them via this little puzzle piece. So notice that your Chrome bar only has so much real estate for extensions. And so it defaults to hiding them under this puzzle piece. You'll see that the ones that have been selected as pinned, that are blue pins, those ones live up here. Other ones that I've added that are not pinned just live in the list to the right. So just so you know, once you install an extension, it'll show up quickly and then it'll disappear. It's hiding in this black puzzle piece. If you want it to live up on your bar so that you can click it easily, you'll want to go ahead and click the pin button and then it will get added up here. That's something that trips people up often when they add extensions. Okay, so the first extension that I would like to show you is Immersive Reader. And it's a great extension in terms of making things a little more accessible to take online articles and sort of support your students with being able to read those. So I've searched just very quickly an article on how sea otters can fight climate change. And I have Immersive Reader already installed right here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on it. And notice that it's now opened up the article. Sorry. It's opened up and it says, it's reminding me that to get started, select some text on your website, right click it and choose help me read this. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to select some text. I'm going to right click and then go help me read this, which is also accessing Immersive Reader. And it's opened it up in a new window. And I can go ahead and press play and it will read that text to me. Notice that it's also eliminated all the extra distractions of ads and the picture, and the font size is really big. So it just sort of makes that text a little bit more accessible. I'm going to go ahead and press play.
Otters are creatures steeped in superlatives. And Hydra lutris is the furriest animal on Earth.
Another thing that's super cool about Immersive Reader is that you can adjust the settings. So you can adjust the voice to be more turtley or more rabbity, depending on how fast you want it to go. So you could slow it down for a student, you could speed it up, and you can also change from female to male. So for example, here's very slow male reading it.
Earth, with up to 140,000 hairs on every square centimeter of it.
He sounds like he needs coffee. Okay. All right.
Its
and
body,
speed it
meaning its
up.
hairs are 700 times as dense as those on a human head.
So it's nice because again, like you notice, as soon as we press play, it also tracks for the student what word they're on. It sort of blacks out the other words and focuses on the word. So again, yeah, great for beginning readers, super helpful for kids with visual impairments, and very easy to use on anything that you see online. So this is one thing that you would want to have installed on your student's Chromebook. It works on Chromebooks so that they would be able to use it on their own and you could teach them. Yes, Allie, I will put a list of the Chrome extensions in the chat and email them. They're also in the slides with links to access them. So on this slide, this little link right there takes you to the Chrome extension store to go ahead and get Immersive Reader. And I'll give you the link to the slides again one more time before we close today. Okay, another helpful tool that's also for online articles is Mercury Reader. And I like Mercury Reader because it takes articles and again, it removes the distractions of the ads and the extra pictures and the things around the sides. And it makes the article just sort of more like a clean piece of text. You didn't hear it from me, but you can also use it to save articles as PDFs. So say you have a New York Times subscription, your friend does not, you want to send them an article and they're not able to read it, you can access an article, save it as a PDF, and then send it to somebody else. So I'm going to show you how Mercury Reader works. Go back to that original article on sea otters. And Mercury Reader is this little gray rocket. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. And now you can see how it's taken that sort of very overwhelming article and combined it into something that's much more perfect, printer friendly, right? So, and then you also have the ability to email it, to post it on Facebook or Twitter. And I think at the top right, you can go ahead and change the typography if you wanted to. You could change the theme from light to dark if you have a student that prefers reading in a setting like this. And you can even change the text size. So it's just a really nice thing to be able to access articles without the extra distractions. A little bit similar to Immersive Reader, but doesn't have the read aloud feature. All right, and then the next one that I wanted to show you is Read Write for Google, which is a level up from Immersive Reader, a level up from Mercury Reader. This one is a free tool from Google that enables your students to do a bunch of things with digital text. So not only does it read for your students, but it also enables them to highlight different parts of it. It enables them to translate words if they're stuck on a word. It has features that has like a picture dictionary. So if they are not sure what a word means, they can look up a picture of what it means. So let me show you how it works again with our How Sea Otters Can Fight Climate Change. Read Write for Google is this little purple icon right here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on it and it opens up my Read Write toolbar and you can see all of the sort of different functions that it has. So when you hover over it, it gives you examples of what each of the things are. So I think for prediction, if you wanted to, you could ask your students to go ahead and find a piece in the article and make a prediction about it. It also has these highlight features, so you could ask your students to go ahead and highlight different parts of the text. It's a way for them to interact more with an article online as you would a traditional textbook or printed article, so that you can sort of get more of those pieces. So I have Furriest highlighted. Notice that I can look up Furriest online. I can also go back and get Furriest translated, and it's translated it into Spanish. I can even have it read out loud to me, maybe if there was a word that I was stuck on and I wasn't sure how to read it.
Furriest.
Peludo.
So I can have the translation read to me as well. I can also go ahead and play and have the whole text read to me.
Sea otters were hunted to the brink in the 19th century.
His voice sounds funny because I was playing with the settings again last night. So that's another one where you can change the speed and the person who's talking by clicking over here on the more button and going into settings can change the speed. You can change the person who's talking to you. They have multiple different people. And click save. So there's lots of sort of tools to play around with in Read Write for Google. I tend to prefer Immersive Reader better just because I feel like it simplifies things a little bit more. This still leaves the distractions on the page, which I don't like as much. But it also has another feature where you can have students so that they have sort of a tracker of where they are, like you would have students who are reading a book if they cover a certain part of the page and they want to just focus on that. So there's lots of different tools available in Read Write for Google. Okay. I'm going to pause there and give you a quick opportunity to sort of play with some of the things that we've talked about today. So I made a choice board for you, which I just found a template online that has some of the things that we've talked about. So it has reading more about UDL. I found this really cool but overwhelming, oh, that's the wrong link. I'll fix that link for you. This matrix for UDL and tech integration, which talks about all the different pieces of UDL and then examples of tech tools that you can use to support them. There's also a place for you to practice some of the tricks from Google Sheets, for you to go back to watch a video on the tips for Google Classroom. You could try out Immersive Reader, try out Read Write for Google, Mercury Reader, or explore some of the free Hyperdoc templates. So I want to give you some time just to sort of try out one thing that you saw today that you're like, I think I want to use that with my students, so that you can test it out and then still have time to ask any questions that you might have. So for the next 12 minutes until 10:25, I want you to just think about one thing from today that you'd like to practice and go ahead and try it out. I invite you to turn off your camera and microphone while you play. I'll still be here, but we'll come back at 10:25. And I'm going to quickly fix that link for the tech integration matrix. All right, find a good place to pause or stop. Give me a thumbs up when you're back. It can just be an emoji reaction thumbs up. Doesn't have to be an actual one. All right, Amy. Hi, Sherry. Hi, Paul. Okay, so thanks, Allie and Andrew. Thanks, Nancy. All right, before we close today, I just wanted to, I'm curious what you played with or what you think you might take back or use after today's session. Thanks, Valerie. Paul, did you end up going with Mercury Reader or did you have a pause?
I like the immersive. And
Yeah.
I also like the Mercury.
Yeah.
The warnings that Google gives you are really jarring. I was glad you asked that question because especially the way the data is so connected. Once you share it with somebody or once it's on a drive that's shared, it changes and it's a little daunting.
Yeah. I agree. Okay, Allie watched one of the Google videos for making sums for different columns. Cool. Caseload spreadsheets, yes. Sherry's going to take some time to play with it. Thank you, Andrew. Yes, the YouTube links are super helpful. Okay, I have a shameless plug before I let you go, which is that tomorrow we're having our back to school reboot and it's all online. It's from 9 until noon and there's a bunch of sessions. If you liked the tips on Google Sheets today, then you'll love, there's a session called Getting Sheety by a tech coach from Soledad, and she's amazing. And so she's going to show you all that and then some. It's very flexible. The sessions are quick. They're 40 minutes long and you can opt in to the ones that you like. It's all available at rebootsantacruzcoe.org. If you're not able to make it tomorrow, no worries. Everything's going to be recorded and available after the fact. But there will be a raffle at the end. Have to be present to win. So just a small plug, want to let you know that that's happening tomorrow. And just say thank you so much for coming. I enjoyed spending my morning with you. And again, I appreciate your flexibility for me coming late. I just put a link for the slides one more time in the chat so that you can grab the links to the extensions and the resources. And I hope you all have a wonderful Wednesday. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.